Well, good morning, and I mean morning. It's like 2 a.m. And once again under my RV. This is a Workhorse chassis, a W24. And what I've come up with is a fuel pump. I guess a fuel pump bypass. If your fuel pump fails, it's a workaround until you get somewhere where you can drop the tank and get it replaced. So let me back up a little bit further, explain. The reason I wanted to do this is I read on the RV forums that people with this particular chassis and design, and maybe it's common with a lot of other motorhomes, we have this large fuel tank, which is right here. This RV has a 75-gallon fuel tank. Inside we have a fuel pump that also has the fuel pressure regulator built onto it too. And here's the line connections. You see, this line here normally connects right here to the filter. This line comes out of the tank. It's coming out of the tank at about 62 psi because it's regulated in the tank. Goes through your fuel filter, goes through this T. This T, you go up, and this line returns it right back to the tank. So the fuel pump is constantly pumping fluid or fuel constantly, so it helps keep the fuel pump cool. And then the remaining fuel goes out this line, which heads on up the frame rail to the engine to keep you going down the road. So that's how the system works. But if your fuel pump fails on you, you can be in a heck of a predicament. Say, for instance, you're going down the interstate, the engine just dies or whatever. I don't know how often, if it gives you much of a warning. I guess sometimes they could just quit at any time. So you pull off the side of the road, the engine don't start, troubleshoot, you get a tow truck, you tow it somewhere, then whenever they get somewhere, you got to find somebody who can work on a motorhome to begin with. Somebody has to have the ability to remove up to 75 gallons of fuel out of the fuel tank, drop the fuel tank, order a fuel pump, get the fuel pump in, install it, put everything all back together, and $1,000, $1,200 later, I don't know how much. It's probably going to be pretty expensive. Tow bill. You'll be back on your vacation. And I've been thinking about that actually for over a year. I've been pondering that possibility. This RV now is 11 years old, and I think there's always a chance. So I thought there was got to be a way I could come up with a workaround. If my fuel pump ever failed, what could I do to get myself on down the road, get myself to a campground? Because if I could get into a campground, and I thought I had the idea, you could buy a couple of brand new large 55-gallon trash cans, momentarily pump the fuel out into those brand new, drop the tank, put in a filter, pump it back in. So in a worst case scenario, or maybe if you're not too far from home, with this little thing I've come up with right there, it is, and you could at least get yourself back home and do it yourself if you wanted to, or just get you to a better repair shop if you was out west in the middle of nowhere. But anyway, so I got to thinking about that. But my biggest problem was, first of all, I had the idea, okay, can we just, here's the line going into the tank, and I thought, well, can't you just hook like a pump like this? This is the Inline external fuel pump, 100 psi. My first thought, okay, can we just hook onto this line and pump it on up to the engine? Well, that won't work because you can't suck through this, because this is going through the regulator and the fuel pump. I mean, I put a line on here and try it. You can suck fuel through it, but just barely. It's very difficult. So I know a pump would never work. So I said, okay, that's not going to work. So then I got to strategizing. So the biggest problem is accessing fuel in the tank, because there's no clearance. If you have a little space, that's all you got. Between the tank and the floor, there's just, with this particular design, there's no way to get to the fuel lines or to drop. It's just no way to do it. So I got to looking on this particular one. When they build the chassis, luckily, and maybe they do it on other ones too, they design the fuel tank so that you can fill it either from the left side or the right side. So mine is a left side fill, so that's where my lines are. But luckily, I happened to be in here looking around, and I found on the left side there's the plug, and actually right here it is. So on the left side of this tank, if you look around, you'll find this plug. You can remove the hose clamp and remove it, and that gives you an access where you can drop a line down into the tank. So that's what I've done. So I've got, you can see I've made my fittings here off my fuel filter, come down to my pump, and then this right here is a piece of 1/4-inch hose, and it runs down along the side, and I just dropped it right into the tank. All this works now. I've done tested it. I drove it down the road, so I'm fixing to dismantle everything and put it back factory. And then I'll show you in detail of how I did all that. But while it's all still together, I wanted to show you a little bit of what I come up with and the fact that it does work. And I think it's pretty slick, and I've only spent about $100 or so. I'll have to get all that itemized, and I'll have all the part numbers and stuff for you. Okay, I had to pause for a second. One thing I wanted to talk about is also, because this is absolutely not a permanent solution by no means. This is just something to get you by, get you out of a bad spot if you just need to get to the next town. Could save you a big tow bill. But if you're under here, you want to, be sure if you're attempting this, absolutely pull the fuel pump relay up on the firewall. You pull the plastic cover off on these Workhorses anyway, and you'll have a diagram inside that plastic cover, and it will show you which relay controls the fuel pump. So you want to unplug that, because if you don't, and you're under here taking lines loose, and somebody comes along, turns on the key, there's going to be a truckload of fuel going to pump out of that line, and that's something you definitely don't want to happen. Okay, I'm going to talk about my first attempt and my first failure. My first attempt, of course, I realized I installed a gauge on the dashboard, so I can always monitor my fuel pump pressure. And I got on my YouTube channel, you'll see a video on how I did that. It was, maybe a $60 part, and it's really handy to have, just so you always know what your fuel pump pressure is, and if you see it dropping, maybe you can catch an early failure, save yourself some trouble. So my first idea, I thought, okay, I can maybe come up with this bypass. Now that I've got a way of accessing the fuel, I thought, okay, I need an inline pump. So this pump puts out 100 psi, but I thought, well, 100 psi, I can't be sending 100 psi to my injectors. I need to get it regulated some way. So that's where I found this. This is a fuel filter with a built-in regulator. This is a common fuel filter that's used on some late model Corvettes. And the way it works is the fuel goes in from the fuel pump, then this is your return line. It would go back to the fuel tank, and then on the other end right here, this would go on up to the engine. So that's what I did. I had all this plumbed up as a test number 1, and started it up and noticed I only had 52 psi. And I thought, well, that's not any good. Why am I not getting 59 psi? So one thing I figured is the distance. I believe when these things are used in a Corvette situation, these are mounted really close to the engine. I believe so. That's the only thing I can figure. And the distance we're going here, this motorhome's 38 feet long. So I eliminated that. So I thought, well, let me just hook up the pump directly and see what kind of psi I got. So I took this out and plumbed it directly. So here's my inline fuel pump. I think it's like $60-something at O'Reilly's. There's my line that I got dropped into the tank through the extra fill port on the left hand, on the right hand side. And so it's coming out 100 psi, and to my surprise, once I go through the filter and it does the return, goes up to the engine, at the engine I'm getting 58, 59 psi. So it's perfect. That's what I'm looking for. I think normally running psi we're looking around 60, 61 when I'm going down the road with the factory line. So I'm just a couple of psi's off, and you'll see later in the video me driving down the road and going 4,000 RPM. Just for a moment it dropped down to like 49 psi, but I rarely run the engine at those kind of RPMs. But just as a test, I wanted to see how it would do. And I was monitoring the fuel trims. Everything looked good, ran great, no problems. So I wanted to explain a little bit about that. There's something else I thought of as something you should always carry with you is a spare fuel pump. Now if you crawl underneath your Workhorse chassis and you still got one of these filters that looks like this, then it's probably never been changed. It's been on there for a long time because I think they quit making these several years ago. And now you get this little adapter. I believe Dale from IRV2 forums still sells these. I'll confirm that and I'll put a link on the below the notes here on the video. And then you can just use a standard Fram Wix fuel filter that you can pick up anywhere. So if you come over there and if yours is all rusted up and don't look good, be sure to change it and keep a spare. So this is actually my spare. I got lucky, found this sitting on a guy's part shelf. It's brand new. It was full of dust, but or the box was dusty anyway. So that's never been used yet, but I keep it as a spare. So if I have any issues, I can take care of that on the road. And something else you want to keep with you is a 5/8 line wrench. So be sure to keep you one of those so that way you can change that. I keep a whole set of line wrenches with me in the RV. Must have tools if you have any fuel filter issues. Oh, and also if you go to change your filter or do anything working on these lines, you want to be sure, break the lines loose, start wiggling things, because you most likely will have somewhere around, potentially up to 60 psi still on these lines, and it's going to drip quite a bit out, once it gets all the pressure off. So break them loose, start wiggling a little bit till you see the fuel seeping out, and so that way you don't get an eye full. All right, I just put this back in, but I realized something might help you out a little bit. With tools wise, all you need is a 5/8 line wrench and also a 1/2 inch wrench, or you could use a 1/2 inch thin wall socket, because you got 3 1/2 inch bolts that loosens up all these clamps here. You got 3 of those. Well, no, actually you got 4. Yeah, you got 4. But connection wise, like when you're putting it back together, make this your first connection, make this your second connection, make this your last. The reason you want to make this your last, because when you go to put this line in there, you're going to see, well, it's going to be kind of give you trouble, because what you need to do, you need to pull back on this line so it comes down and bends. Well, this bend, that gives you a little room. You can flex it, so you can bend it back about a 1/2 inch or so, and that'll get everything to release. Because once you pull that back, your filter will slide back. Oops. A good 1/2 inch or so, and you'll be able to get this line in there, because it goes in there kind of deep. So that's what I just did, and I thought that might help you out if you've never done it before. This ain't my first rodeo. Unfortunately, I've been under this RV and spent many hours underneath this thing, trying to keep everything in tip-top shape. Something else I'm going to do while I'm under here, I'm going to crawl up forward just a little bit and show you. I had an issue one time with vapor lock. That's something you don't hear very much, but the symptom I had, I think it hasn't done it before. This is like 3 years ago. I was leaving Tucson, heading up to Grand Canyon. Can't remember what highway, but it was a big old long hill, very high elevation, a 90-degree day, and almost got to the top and just lost all power and pulled off the side of the road. All it would do is it was popping and cracking. It would only idle. So I shut everything down, looked around. Everything seemed okay. Let it sit there about 30 minutes, let it cool off. Started it up, and everything seemed okay, and I made it on in. Then I started doing some troubleshooting, and I'll crawl forward here in just a second, and I'll show you what I found. Okay, everything's all bolted up, back to factory, like it was when I started. So I can put my relay in there and start up, and then I'll crawl back under here just to make sure there's no leaks. So anytime you monkey with fuel lines, don't just tighten things up and forget about it. Come back and check, make sure there are no leaks once everything's pressurized. Alright, I'm going to try to show you how this line, okay, let me back up a little bit. So this is the line coming around, goes around the corner. Where we at? Goes around the corner. There you go, see it? That's where it connects to my inline fuel pump. So it's coming around here, I'm going through the frame, and this is where, if this RV had fuel fill on the right hand side, then this is where the fuel line would come out and drop the side of the motorhome. And this plug here is just for the vent. the air vent, but it's too small to stick any kind of line through. And this one, you can just barely get a 1/4 inch fuel line through. Now, I just momentarily stuck a rag in here just to keep any fumes from escaping. Alright, and there you can see now a 1/4 inch line will just fit in there. And I'd like to know if somebody can tell me what this is. See those little, there's like 2 little valves there. They open up like little flappers. One thing I could figure would be like if you have a rollover or a wreck of some sort, and it rips all the lines loose, it keeps fuel from just gushing out. That's my guess, but I'm just guessing at that. Let me pull this out for you and I'll show you. And then I got me a piece of brass pipe, which gives it a little bit of weight and keeps it on the bottom. Alright, so there's my line right there, and that works perfectly. You'd think that'd be too small, but it supplies plenty. The 1/4 inch line and this little piece of copper pipe, because I couldn't, if you try to use a larger pipe and you swell this line up anymore, it will not get past those little valves right there. It won't get past it. And so here's the factory plug. So I'll put that back in there, put my hose clamp on it. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this plug and I'm going to make this, I'm going to drill a hole through it so that this fuel line will fit nice and snug. And so that way it'd be a little bit quicker for me, and I can just put it on there and tighten up the hose clamp and get on down the road if I ever need it. Because I'm going to take all this off, wrap it up, put it in a box and put it underneath the RV and hope I never need it. But if a fuel pump ever fails, at least I have a plan B. I also need to mention that was a real pain getting this plug off. When this is on from the factory, they of course install the plug on there, and the clamp is in that position. The screw is pointing straight up. Of course, when they build the chassis, there's no RV sitting on top of it, so it's easy for them to get to. But if you try to get to it now, it's going to be a booger, because there's just absolutely no room to get to it. So the way I was able to do that, let me show you what I used. I used this little thing right here. So it's got the 1/4 inch drive. It's got the little hex in the bit that will in turn fit into a small ratchet wrench, 1/4 inch drive. And then I put me a 5/16 socket on it. So by doing that, doing all this one-handed, I got to get me a cameraman. Alright, then I was able to get up in here with my fingers barely and just like get one click at a time. But, you know, after 5-10 minutes I finally got it loose enough and got it off. But of course now that I've got it off, I'm going to put it back in on. I'm going to put the hose clamp toward the bottom so I can have easy access to it. And there you go. See, there you go. That's a good shot. You can see the intake there, the fuel tube. So I'll put this on there and put the clamp on it. That's what I'll do. And I'll have easy access with a long screwdriver. Okay, I didn't talk about powering the inline fuel pump. So what I did, I just ran me some, got me some lamp wire, got me a couple of these big battery clamp-ons, so I can just run that under the frame. Here's my battery in my little storage box. Just clamp it on the battery, quick and easy, and I've got power to my fuel pump. So it makes for a quick connection, and I can get back on the road if I ever need to. Okay, I talked about the fuel pump relay a while ago, so I'm going to show you where it's at. Take your cover off, and inside your box here will tell you up there in the top corner, you can see it, there it is, top corner fuel pump relay. So here's the relay, and I'll just plug it right back. And I'll turn on the key and make sure I have no leaks. Okay, this is my dashboard gauge that I installed about a year or so ago. Now this is the factory pump running, 62 psi. Now I'm going to go over there and make sure there's no leaks. Alright, everything looks good and dry under here. Can you hear that noise? You hear how noisy those pumps are? I guess that's normal. I don't know, 11 years old, that's the sound it makes. It's the sound mine makes anyway. So, Okay, back under the RV. Earlier I talked about vapor lock and how I experienced it a couple of years ago. And so I was trying to figure out, troubleshoot it. I was trying to determine if I had vapor lock or if I had a fuel pump that was failing. So in my experimenting, I had with me, this is out in Arizona, I had with me at the time one of those remote thermometers, like you put the thermometer outside and wirelessly it will give you the temperature. So I had one of those with me, and I took it and I just tied it right here. And on our next little, the next town we was going to, it was still hot, 90 degrees. I was monitoring temperatures, and so from right here I was getting like 150 degree temperature. And so another thing is, I figure what may have been happening on that particular day, because I believe as you get higher in altitude, the fuel boils at a lower temperature versus at a lower altitude, and or sea level anyways. So it was my thinking that what was happening with our system, the older, I think before 2004, you would have your fuel line would run up to the fuel rail at the engine. Pressurized, the regulator would be at the fuel rail. It would drop the pressure down and then pump the fuel right back to the fuel tank. But in doing so, and pumping all the way up and all the way back, it took all the heat from the engine back to the fuel tank. So it kept cycling over and over, and you get more and more heat in the fuel and more emissions. So I think in 2004 they changed the emissions or the laws, whatever, whoever decides that stuff, so that they would make the return loop back at the tank, like I showed you earlier, at the fuel filter. So now the fuel no longer pumps all the way up to the engine and returns all the way back to the tank. Now it does the loop right there next to the fuel tank where the fuel filter is. But in doing so, I got to thinking about that. With this system and this fuel line being so close to that muffler, it's not like that fuel's passing by very fast. It's just whatever the speed the injectors are spraying that fuel. So it gives that because that fuel is moving slowly, it has enough time to pick up all this heat off this exhaust. If that's getting 150 degrees, and on the day that I vapor locked, it was like 90 degrees, and I was on top of a mountain. I don't know what elevation I was at, but it's high. But anyway, after I kind of troubleshot that, I stopped at an AutoZone. I found this material here. You see it back here. It kind of looks like an asbestos sleeve. Well, I took this connector loose and slid this over my line, and it goes all the way up past the muffler. It's like 2 foot long, I think. So that helped to keep the heat off that line, because that's what it's made for. It's made for like racing engines and stuff. So to keep the heat off the lines and prevent vapor lock. And then I also added this bubble foil and some of this shiny duct tape and foil tape. And ever since I've done that, I've probably put 25,000 miles on it since then. And I've been out west, this was 3 years ago, my first trip out west, and I was out there again last year, did about 10,000 miles or so. So we average 13,000 miles a year. So I do my best to try to keep everything running. But you can see how I ran that, so it deflects all that heat off that fuel line as it's passing the muffler. So that has helped me. If you ever know of anybody that may have had a vapor lock situation, or you climbing a big hill on a hot day and you just lose power, pops and cracks, and you pull over to the side, this might help you also. Something else I did. Let me turn around and go the other direction. Oh, is well, let me change this light. Okay, something else I did to help alleviate heat and try to get a little bit better performance. From the factory, this is a 2005 Winnebago Voyage and W24 chassis. For my particular model, the two pipes, it came out into a Y just above the differential, and Y together into one pipe that exited out behind the wheel. But I'd seen other RVs of the same year and the same chassis where they didn't do that. They did just like this. They had an individual pipe for each muffler. So that's what I did. I went and I just got rid of all that heavy pipe that was going out so far. I got rid of it, and I thought this might help alleviate some of the heat, because we had pipes going up and over into the differential back behind close to the fuel tank. So And I thought, well, maybe it had, maybe it helped alleviate a little back pressure too. I'm not really for sure if it did that or not. But I got these, I think these are called mandrel bent elbows, so it keeps a nice smooth shot. So I got one on each side now, so this big 8.1 Vortec can breathe a little bit better. And it does seem to perform well. So maybe it helped. I think it did anyway. Well, here's my little homemade fuel pump bypass kit, I guess you might want to call it that. Got it all boxed up now, and this is the way I'll leave it. I'll just put it in the storage compartment of the RV. Hopefully I'll never need it, but if I do, it's there. And I was just going to show you the part numbers that I used to make this contraption. So, okay, here's the fuel pump. And the fuel pump I got at O'Reilly's, and it is, here's the box. Right there. So this part number for the fuel pump is an E16020. From O'Reilly's. I think it was about 79 bucks for a fuel pump. So that's right there. Then I also had to get me a piece of high pressure line, short piece, but I got way more than I needed. It's rated, it's 3/8 in diameter, rated at 225 psi. So I got that running from here to this connection. Now this connection here was this device right here, made by Dorman. I think I've also got it at O'Reilly's. And there's the part number 800155. Now on one end of it, I cut it off because I had to use a compression fitting right here. And on the other end, I've got this little lip, so that this fuel line, being a high pressure line, somewhat high pressure, 100 psi I guess, I wanted to go over this lip where I could put a clamp in behind it, so I knew there's no possibility of it coming off and leaking. Then we come down to these fittings. Here's a compression fitting that makes a tight fitting on this 3/8 steel pipe. Then I got this fitting here, which I'm not sure, I think it's called, well, here's the number, here's what I got. Right there, it is elbow fitting, 06 MP. I don't know exactly what all these means, but it means something. And I did, when I first put this in, I had a slight bit of a leak at these threads. So I took it back apart, put some Loctite on it, and then tightened it back up. I wanted to, you would be careful, and I let it dry really well before I added any fuel to the system, because you sure don't want to have any kind of pipe dope or anything heading toward your injectors. Of course, all this is before the fuel filter anyway, so it would probably catch it. But just don't go crazy with anything if you got to seal your threads. And of course, then this goes right onto the fuel filter, which that's one more fitting. Here's my spare filter that I keep. So you got this, another compression fitting. Then you got this O-ring fitting that it in turn screws right into the fuel pump and makes a nice tight seal. Of course, you saw all that on the earlier video. So and then, oh yeah, I didn't have this other part made, but then this is the part that I made up to put on the filler tube. So you got the filler tube there on the side of the fuel tank, and I wanted to make a fairly quick, easy way to connect this up. So this is just 1.5 inch hose connector used like on your drain lines under your sink. If you got a leak, you got to cut it out, seal it back together. Comes with 2 clamps. There's just a piece of threaded PVC I shoved in there. I drilled a hole in it, run my fuel line through. So this will drop into the filler neck on the side of the fuel tank. Nice long hose. Here's my copper pipe. Then on the bottom, you'll see I drilled a couple holes in the side, just in case it landed right smack on the bottom of the tank, it could still suck fuel. So I did that afterwards. And then, all in all, I think that's all you'll need. And you can just make your own. And then following up here, I'm fixing to show you me driving the RV down the road and getting it up to 4,000 RPMs, and everything works just fine. Okay, this is test number 1. with my external electric fuel pump hooked up with no regulator, just pump only. There's my PSI. You can see it, like a steady 55 PSI, and we're cruising at 55 miles an hour. Everything seems to be working really good. We're a closed loop, and I'm going to drive it a little bit here, let everything get warmed up. Got a couple good hills to pull. I'm going to get my RPMs up and see if it continues to operate, and hopefully it'll be okay. All's good. I climbed a hill a while ago and hit about 4,000 RPMs. It dropped down to 49 was its lowest point. So we've got a little hill we're going up now. We'll see how it does. I've got it to the floor. That's 50. Staying at 53. There's 4,000 RPMs. Yeah, drops to about 49 when you hit about 4,000 RPMs. But that's rare. I usually don't let it do that. Okay, but just cruising speed, we're doing well. I think this is going to work just great. Not a permanent solution, but in a pinch, I think this will do just awesome. So we'll head on back home and put it back in the wheels. And I just would also show my fuel trims, if you can see it. Fuel trim is just, both of them looks good. It's not like the computer, it's like F2. Long-term fuel trim, if you can see it. So it's not like the computer has to make up for anything. Everything seems to be working well. So, I like it, I like it. So we're not far from home, so we'll wrap this thing up.